After experiencing 5 consecutive months of price drops, the U.S. housing market is collapsing at an alarming rate. This is evidenced by the lowest mortgage application readings in the 21st century and the fastest mortgage rate increase in modern American history. For years, the housing market has been on a downward spiral, with builders, real estate agents, loan officers, investors, and sellers rejoicing as millions of young Americans watched the American dream become a nightmare. The post-2020 real estate world is a manifestation of greed, manipulation, and denial that will be studied for decades to come. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to an imminent market crash, many viewers may still harbor doubts about the severity of the situation. This is largely due to the fact that most buyers have grown up in an environment where real estate prices only go in one direction, up. According to the Case-Shiller Index, national year-over-year price increases have been observed since 2011. Therefore, people under the age of 37 have not experienced a market where home values declined. Real estate has been a reliable way to get rich for over a decade, making it a social norm to use extreme leverage. However, the question on everyone's mind is whether this time is different. Are we on the brink of a massive correction? To understand the current situation, we need to take a step back to 2007. Despite the commonly held belief that the 2008 crash was caused by poor people and subprime loans, the reality is that it was a much more complicated situation that went deeper than just bad loans. The U.S. housing market is currently collapsing after 5 consecutive months of price decline, the fastest mortgage rate increase in modern American history, and the lowest mortgage application reading of the 21st century. For years, the housing market has been on the rise, but this has resulted in prices growing out of reach for young Americans, turning the American dream into a nightmare. The post-2020 real estate world will be written about for decades due to greed, manipulation, and denial. Despite the new evidence suggesting a future market crash, many buyers remain skeptical, having grown up in a world where real estate prices only go up. The Case-Shiller Index on the national level shows that there have been price increases on a year-over-year basis every year since 2011. This means that anyone under the age of 37 has not experienced an environment where home values declined. Real estate has been a reliable way to get rich using socially accepted forms of extreme leverage. The question on everyone's mind is whether this time is different and if we are heading towards a massive correction. To understand the situation, we need to look back at 2007 and how the investors played a significant role in the crash, abusing the corrupt mortgage industry. Poor people and bad loans were not the primary sources of the problem, it was the investors, particularly the mom and pop investors with property portfolios of under a dozen units, who dominated the speculation market. This led to more and more risky products in what researchers later called the mortgage arms race. When home prices were increasing, some people leveraged millions of dollars into assets in a modern-day gold rush. The entire system was corrupt, from top to bottom, but people did not care about that, all they cared about was making money. Loan officers, agents, brokers, and everyone in between were incentivized to get borrowers the dollars no matter what their income was. They would do anything to make it work because, after the paperwork cleared, it was no longer their problem. They sold off the risk to some other bank in a real-life billion-dollar hot potato game. As far as buyers were concerned, they were just legally taking money from a local bank and only had to hold the house for a year to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, or even millions. The media narrative often overlooks or excludes the role that investors played in the 2008 housing crash, and how they exploited the corrupt mortgage industry. Academic studies suggest that poor people and bad loans were not the primary source of the problem. Instead, it was the investors, specifically smaller mom and pop investors with property portfolios under a dozen units, who dominated the speculation market in 2007. As home prices rose, these investors became more and more involved in risky products in what researchers called the mortgage arms race. The entire system was corrupt, with fraud rampant, but investors didn't care as they were making a lot of money. They leveraged millions of dollars into assets, expecting to make hundreds of thousands, even millions, of dollars by holding onto the properties for a year or so. This strategy of maxing out leverage was common in hotbed cities, and it worked until prices collapsed, leading to a global crisis. Investors were the first to bail when they got a whiff of a bear market, and this investor class that recklessly speculated in the market has not gone away. In fact, in the most recent run-up, the situation is worse than what was happening in the mid-2000s. Redfin's quarterly investor report shows evidence that extreme investor speculation is still a problem, especially in those hotbed cities out west. Home purchases by investors fell 45.8% in the fourth quarter of 2022, an all-time record worse than what was seen in 2008. Despite this, investors remain deeply involved, with nearly 18% of all homes sold in the fourth quarter of 2022 going to investors, nearly 2 times higher than the peak of prices in 2007 and more than 3 times higher than what was considered normal back in 2000. Residential real estate investing has simply gotten out of control, with a craze going on where everyone wants to become a landlord. This is perceived to be the ticket to millions, with the subreddit real estate investing growing from 10,000 members in 2018 to 1.6 million today. Unfortunately, this trend is not limited to big cities, and the worst part is that it's probably even more destructive than the graphs suggest. The methodology Redfin used to get these investor numbers is not very detailed, and there are concerns that the situation is even worse than what the data suggests. In the most recent investor report, Redfin included more information about the methodology used to create the graphs, which confirms something that was suspected. In the previous crash, small investors played a significant role in the housing bubble. Redfin analyzed county records across the U.S. dating back to 2000 to determine how many sales involved investors. They identified investors by searching for buyers whose names included keywords such as LLC Incorporated, Trust Corp Homes, and ownership codes such as association, corporate trustee, and company joint venture. However, this method misses the amateur investor class who may use their own name or unique company name. It's impossible to determine what percentage of the market falls outside this net. Many people buy homes with the intention of flipping or renting, and some use unethical means encouraged by the government, such as obtaining a loan for a property they don't plan on occupying, which carries a higher interest rate. It's clear that if you live in a house with your family, you have a greater incentive to keep paying your mortgage, as you have much more at stake. The bank views your loan as less risky because nobody wants to get evicted. However, there is a problem with the way the mortgage industry is set up. Investors actively receive loans that are intended for regular people who just want a home to live in, and the industry has yet to separate the two categories in a meaningful way. This even applies to government-sponsored programs such as the FHA loan, which allows certain homebuyers to purchase with as little as 3.5% down, but requires them to live there for the first year. Despite this rule, investors commonly commit mortgage fraud or use loopholes to participate. For example, they might use an FHA loan to purchase a triplex and not live in the unit for the required year. There are countless loopholes and tricks to exploit for more money. The prevalence of abuse, fraud, and tricks in the industry is demonstrated by the case of Matthew Cox, who spent 13 years in prison for committing mortgage fraud in 2006.